Instructions. Read the following and then summarize what you have learned. While reading, write any questions you have to the right of the instructions in the white space. Hermann Ebbinghaus, 1950 to 1909, was a German psychologist who founded the experimental psychology of memory. Ebbinghaus's research was groundbreaking at the time, and his work, though he was not a proliferate writer, was generally well received. In recognition of his work in psychology, the forgetting curve, the loss of learned information, is sometimes referred to as the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. The graph below shows the process by which forgetting occurs. According to this research, people tend to forget rather quickly after learning material. In order to create this graph, Ehrman decided to test his own memory and how quickly he forgot information. To do this, he memorized lists of words and testing how many he could recall. To avoid the use of association, the process of remembering based on other factors like smell, taste, spatial location, he then created 2,300 nonsense syllables. He needed to do this because it is easier to remember words we have heard before as opposed to brand new words. The reason for this is because we have heard it before and we've had repetition in our memory. In all of these 2,300 words were 3 letters long and used the standard word format of consonant, vowel, consonant. For example, Zuck, Z-U-C, and Q-A-X. So the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve over here is represented, and all of these different points go over the curve. More than half of memory loss occurs within the first hour, which according to the curve we can see, this is immediate, and 63 minutes later, we're less than 50% of memory. Most of the material that will be forgotten is done so within the first 8 hours, so we can see from immediate to 8 hours later that we are over 50% less, and that generally we forget about 40% of what we have just processed within the first 20 minutes. So going from 100% memory to only 60% 19 minutes later. In Ebbinghaus's studies, he found that of those 2,300 words he had forgotten, 55% of those words after only 63 minutes. He repeated this test multiple times and concluded that on average, more than half of the memory loss occurs on new information happened within the first hour. After the first hour of loss of memory is fairly rapid until 2 days after learning something, which we can see the 2-day mark is right over here. After that 2-day mark, the forgetting is relatively shallow. It doesn't happen too fast. So it stays for you at least the rest of the month and possibly further, as long as you still remember it after 2 days. So you can see in the graph above that the line from 2 days to 31 days over here is relatively horizontal, and the forgetting from immediate recall to 2 days is quite vertical and steep over here. This can be seen in these diagrams below, from 2 days to 31 and immediate to 2 days over here. Ebbinghaus also noted in his studies that he could remember more meaningful material, such as a poem, 10 times more easily than his nonsense lists. The more times the stimuli, the nonsense syllables, were repeated, the less time was needed to recall the memorized information. Also, the first few repetitions proved the most effective in memorizing a list. So the questions associated with the article are, what is the forgetting curve? Second, of the new information, how much do we forget on average within the first hour of learning something? After 2 days of learning new information, what happens with respect to our memory? And lastly, why might it be easier to remember something such as a poem as opposed to the 3-letter nonsense words that Ebbinghaus made up, like ZUC, Zuck, and QAX, Cax?